he's a regular visitor at least, and this time he's going to stay until mid-December, so feel free to stop by his office and just start any new collaborations. He's here for that. So.
Great. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, it's great opportunity to be at Links and in Paris for 4 months. I'm really grateful for that. And it's fun to talk about this work. I'm being recorded, so I'll be gentle. Mathematical economists are idiots. That's my main punchline. And I'm going to try to prove that, at least in the context of power systems. So the kind of ideas that have crept into power systems are nuts. They're completely nuts. And it goes back to a lot of people in operations research without background in power systems and without background in economics who have taken sort of over the narrative about what economics means. And it really it's absurd. And this is a comedy show, and I'm going to explain just how absurd it is. The good news is that they've left open all these doors for us. I mean, they've left such a complete mess that there's so many beautiful problems to work on to make it work. And so I'll go through that. It's not the sexy math, quote unquote, that mathematical economists like. But when you take into account risk and uncertainty and all these things, it's just not as pretty. You know, you just can't get away with the same tricks. Okay, so this is joint work with everybody. So it started actually with Professor In-Koo Cho, who's an economist at the University of Illinois, who I had a network seminar at Illinois, and he came and he suggested we work on this problem of trying to understand the California power crisis. And that was right after the California crisis happened. So that was almost over 15 years ago. And if he heard what I'm saying, he'd kill me, because he believes in this so strongly. He thinks the mathematics in this talk is supporting deregulation and real-time markets. And I argue the exact opposite. Okay? All right. And so the latest work is with Anna Bušić and our students. Okay, so I'm going to talk about goals in maybe one slide because it's just not enough room for it. And I want to talk about just the absolute beauty of what you can do with control when you actually have access to all the knobs and levers. You can do amazing things. And the genius of the market, I will explain it, the invisible hand, the mathematical justification for that. So I'll give you a crash course in competitive equilibrium theory and economics. And I challenge any of you to give me one example where this is a reality. I've never seen it. Yet it's the foundation, is what everyone learns in Economics 101. I don't know one example of where this theory actually applies. So it doesn't make any sense in the context of power. I'm giving you the completely destroying, there's no joke anymore. And then I'm going to talk about what an efficient outcome really would look like and how it clashes with this. And so that leads to a lot of open questions, and we can have a debate. Okay, so first of all, the goal. So the goal of my work with Anna Bušić and our students is basically, there's all sorts of things. Right now, all over the world, especially like in Germany and California, they're asking for some sort of storage, like battery storage or dams or something, to deal with the volatility of renewable energy. And one way to do it is through loads. It's sort of a joke, pictures of refrigerators and things like that. But if you imagine right now, this building's heated right now, electric heat, it's a big battery. You could reduce the power by 50% for half an hour, and nobody'd notice at all. And so by doing that, just having a signal to the buildings and different loads, you can have the power go up and down, just like charging and discharging a battery, and you could save a lot of money, because doing that with generation, doing that with batteries is very expensive. So we want everyone to be happy. So we want the loads to be happy, the customers happy, and the grid happy. And I'll go and explain one example of our work in this slide. So this is the genius of control. See, that was fast. I gave you the goals in one slide. And I'm going to talk about how to achieve them. And I'll have to say a bit more about what the players want. So first of all, there's something called a balancing authority. So an EDF is a balancing authority in France, I suppose. And I don't really know exactly. But in the United States, the United States is broken up into regions, and there's one entity in charge of each region, and they have to deal with making sure that supply and demand of power are met at all times, all right? And there's something called balancing reserves you'll hear a lot, and that has timescales of from minutes to hours. And basically, it's like flaps in an airplane. You know, basically, an airplane has a planned trajectory, but then it's got feedback loops to make the flaps go up and down in a storm. Okay, the flaps go up, you know, to keep it from going down, and vice versa. And the values there are like plus or minus half a gigawatt, which is like half a nuclear power plant in France. Okay, and so they need resources to do that. Like in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, they've got huge dams, and so they can regulate the water coming out of the dams to track this this regulation signal. All right, so there's peak shavings needed, like in New York City. They've had this problem for 20 years. You know, in the summer at 2 p.m., there's this huge spike in demand because of the heat, and the prices go through the roof during the weekdays. All right, and it happens, you know, every single day in the summer. And why does it keep happening? Given what I told you all, you could pre-cool the buildings and get rid of the peaks. It would be no big deal. All right. All right, and so it would look like this is the trouble. You know, the prices would become flat, and that might put some generation companies out of business. I mean, there's an issue there. Some people wouldn't be happy with flat prices. There are these issues of ramps, which is getting worse and worse in California. So what this is a plot is the net load in California. Okay, so the reason the load goes down in the middle of the day is that's when it's sunny. So when there's lots of sunshine, the net load, you know, the load minus the renewable energy, goes way down. And that slope is very difficult. I mean, there's two problems here. One is you've got a bunch of generators that suddenly have to just stop generating. So they're just sitting there for 6 hours doing nothing. And then they're suddenly asked to ramp up at this fantastic rate, which sometimes they're not capable of doing, and just provide power for those 3 hours and then disappear again. So suddenly they're acting like firefighters. They're playing a totally different role than they would have in the past. And so what we'd like to do is flatten that out and let the generators do what they want to do, which is just supply a steady stream of power. Okay? And the term here is the term demand dispatch, which means it's automatic control of loads to try to smooth out the net load. Okay? So in this case, you can imagine when there's lots of sunshine, you'll draw more power, make the water heaters extra hot, the refrigerator is extra cold, the building's extra whatever. You use more power here, and then so you can use less power here. And when I say more hot, I mean a half a degree. You wouldn't feel it. All right. But if people want to, so there's a contract design element here. If people are willing to put up with more discomfort, then maybe you should give more of incentive. And so it's possible people would suffer. But I'm claiming, Anna and I have been claiming, we can get things like that without anybody even noticing. And I'll give you an example. And there's issues of contingency. Suddenly a generator goes out, and you want to regulate frequency. Okay, so here's an example, my favorite example ever. And it illustrates a lot of the ideas that I'm talking about. I'm sure none of you know this is what your hot water heater looks like. So if you've got an ordinary, well, in the United States, hot water heaters are pretty big. They're like that. And there's two heating elements. There's a lot of stuff. But anyway, the power consumption is a spike train. So there's no power at all for 4 hours or so, and suddenly, wham, 4.5 kilowatts. What is that? That's like 9 blow dryers or something? I don't know. I think that's 500 watts. But it's a lot of power. A fridge is only 100 watts. I mean, these things are, what are they, 30? So it's 4.5 kilowatts of power for just 5 minutes. They turn off. And the temperature of the water, gets hotter, and then it cools off. Gets hotter and cools off. All right? So what do you care about as consumers? How many of you knew about the spike train besides you, Anna? You knew about the spike train. Okay, anybody else? So consumers don't know what their power consumption looks like. All right? They couldn't care less about power. They care about this orange thing, which is the water temperature. And they care about their bill at the end of the day. All right. So the thing is that there's a mismatch. Generation is a spike train, and water temperature is this, oscillating object, and that is gold. So the fact that there's a mismatch is why we can manipulate power, and the consumer doesn't know it. If you took this whole spike train and just moved it, the consumer would never know it. Yet the power would be incredibly different. And so let me show you an example of what you can do with this. So this is an amazing plot. So basically what this is the 3 different rows correspond to 3 different power signals we'd like to track. In the first row, we ask them to do nothing. Don't do anything. So that's why here, this doesn't really fit with the other plots. This is just the nominal power consumption in this simulation. So the simulation was intended to be really realistic. So that's why there's a lot of power consumption in the morning because people take a shower. So you have to heat more water then. And in the afternoon, people come home from work and take a shower or do the laundry or whatever. So there's more. This is real data from, I think it's BPA. I'm going to have to double check. BPA means Pacific Northwest of the US. In this case, we're asking 100,000 water heaters to track this balancing reserve signal, okay? And the amplitude is roughly plus or minus 10 megawatts maximum. Right? Now that turns out to not be feasible, because if you turned off all the water heaters, then you would only be reducing power consumption by 8 megawatts. And so we're asking them to cut down by 10 megawatts. That's like making the water heaters turn into generators. If they're all off, you can't make them more off. All right? And here, we've scaled this up by 4-fold. It's completely not trackable. And you can see that the blue is what the water heaters are doing, while the red is what you asked them to do. So it wasn't feasible, but it still didn't blow up. It's okay. All right? Now, I'd love to give another seminar, or Anna would like to give another seminar on how we did this. But there's a common signal sent to all the water heaters, and they looked at what the grid operator wanted, and they looked at their own temperature, and they flipped a coin, depending on those 2 variables, to change their power mode. And we've designed algorithms to design that randomized policy in such a way that we can get this awesome tracking, all right? And that's it. And the consumers don't feel a thing, because look at these 3 rows. So we just, out of the 100,000, we took the first water heater and looked at its behavior when it was asked to do nothing, when the ensemble was asked to track 10 megawatts or 40 megawatts. And you'd have to look under a microscope to see any difference. The consumers don't notice a thing, even though they're providing this amazing service. So it's the spike train nature of water heaters. It's so awesome. With refrigerators, you'd see more of movement, because refrigerators are more symmetric. Okay, so we can do amazing things with control, and distributed control in particular. If you tried to do this with a centralized authority, it'd be a mess. It's a combinatorial nightmare on which water heater to turn off, and so this is all just very simple distributed control. All right, so there's a book chapter you can look at, or probably seminars on this later on. All right. Okay. Okay, and you can also track ramping signals, things like that. All right. So now we get to the economics piece. All right. So, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you how the power economists think, and why you should not get on the bandwagon. Those of you who are in this. These are plots of prices in various regions. Like when they deregulated the power markets in Illinois, prices went from $30 a megawatt hour to $5,000 a megawatt hour, and they shut down the whole thing. That was in 1998. California kept going, and prices just were all over the place. I mean, forget what the details. There are cases, like example in Australia, where prices go up from the normal $20 a megawatt hour to $10,000. And another region of Australia, it goes to negative 5,000. I can show you hundreds of plots, but it's crazy. Now, this is just to say that it's true the major players and the academic players are screaming that the solution is real-time prices. Frank Wallach at Stanford, who heads the energy center there, is one of the biggest people who says we must have real-time prices. Higher prices will reduce consumption in real time, and that will solve the problem. And they say that the reason for the California power crisis is that we didn't have consumers in the loop, that we didn't have real-time prices. And another person at Berkeley is Soren Bornstein, and he says that virtually all economists agree the outcome of the California crisis was exacerbated by the inability of the demand side of the market to respond to real or artificial supply shortages. So artificial means that somebody was pretending there was a shortage really when there wasn't. And he argues that there'd be none of that gambling if only the demand side could respond to real-time prices. So this realization prompted my research on real-time electricity pricing. So he's been saying that for 18 years, and that's been pushed by policymakers constantly. And if you look at the definition of demand response, in the United States, the definition is that consumers will reduce power consumption in response to price signals. And I'm saying that's stupid. It's an idiotic premise. Bornstein and Wallach aren't stupid people, but they aren't thinking about the real problem. What is it that consumers want? And what is it the grid operator wants? They're looking at an idealized model, which I will describe now, and from that you get these conclusions. But the assumptions in that model are flawed from the very beginning. Okay, so let's do it. So let's look at, take this apart and look at what it would mean to have real-time prices. So this is the analysis one would do. So there's something called a day-ahead market, which I'm critical of as well, but it's not as bad, where they do an auction one day ahead to get resources in a row. That's not too bad, but it's got flaws. What's really troubling is the real-time market, which exists today just between utility companies and generation companies, where there's an auction every 5 minutes, And basically that auction is to deal with the flaps in the airplane, Oh, I need more power, flaps go up. I need less power, flaps go down. Instead of doing that with control, they're having an auction every 5 minutes. Okay, so the real-time market is what I want to talk about, this 5-minute auction. All right, so this model with input show. So we basically looked at reserves, which was the available generation minus the demand. Okay, so some of that is just generated spinning, not providing power. So there's reserves, like in a queuing network. And demand is actual demand minus forecast. And actually generation here is not really generation, it was deviation from the day-ahead market. So it could take on positive and negative values. So everything here is a deviation signal. Because that's what the problem is. We're trying to look at, correct for the errors in our forecast a day ahead. And the only thing we did to try to understand the chaos that's gone on in California was to put in a ramping constraint. So generators can't just instantly go from 0 to a gigawatt. They have ramp constraints. And it's costly to ramp up. I mean, it would have made more sense to put some sort of quadratic cost on the ramping or something. But we just put in a hard constraint. So the derivative of generation, is constrained just in one direction. Okay. Now again, we could have put in lots more constraints to make it more realistic, but that wasn't my goal. We just wanted to show if you put one realistic constraint in this model, we would change the expected consequences. Because our goal was to show why prices go up to $10,000 when they're supposed to be marginal cost. Every economist says price is marginal cost. Why isn't it? Okay, so this constraint kills that result, that price is marginal cost. Okay, so basically, there's also extensions of what I'll say. So first of all, what does efficiency mean? And what is an equilibrium? So there's something called the second welfare theorem in economics, which I'll explain. So you have got these self-interested agents. In this case, you've got a generation company over here who would like to maximize their welfare. I've got a discount parameter here. We're looking at some continuous time model. And then you've got the utility companies here. So they're basically, they're surrogates for the demand, for all of you, because that's how it works in California today. And so basically they each optimize independently, and that doesn't make much sense because generation is generation. So these welfare functions here, they'll be defined with respect to some sort of price. And it's assumed you've got this linearity here. So you've got, for the suppliers, they get money. And so they've got price times generation because that's what they're earning. All right. So there's power supply here times price. And then there's some sort of cost of generation. So that'd be a natural welfare function for the supplier. For the consumer, you've got the utility for consuming power. And you've got the price you have to pay for that power. All right. Should hear some laughter there, but I'll wait. So the equilibrium theory, the big assumption is that this price is exogenous. It's basically coming from God. So basically, nobody can influence it. That price came from some, from Adam Smith, gave those prices, and they will not be touched. Economists know that's often not a very valid assumption, but many economists will claim when you have 5 agents, this is true. Nobel Prize, contenders or those who've gotten them say 5 agents is enough, and this assumption is valid. Anyway, that could be debated. It's called the price-taking assumption. Okay, so efficiency is defined to be that when these 2 agents optimize, there's really a bunch of agents here and a bunch of agents there. Just by some lucky coincidence, their optimal solutions are identical. That's the definition of efficiency. All right, and that's it. And we could debate whether that's a reasonable definition, but it looks pretty cool. So what this means is that it's consistent with what's called the social planner's problem, where a social planner, a benevolent dictator, optimizes for everyone. All right. So in the social planner's problem, there's only one G because G supply equals G demand because a benevolent dictator said this is what you're going to do, and just maximizes the sum of the social welfare. All right. And that is considered the holy grail if you have an efficient outcome. Okay. Now price is irrelevant for the social planner's problem because when you add these 2 guys together, the prices cancel out. Now, please note this was all set up to be easy to solve. Why is it useful to maximize the sum of the welfare, right? This was all done to make it easy to solve. If I put square roots there, which I think would be really useful, a square root would make sense because you don't want somebody to take all the gains, then this would no longer be true. If I added these together, it wouldn't subtract off, So you could take all the wealth could go to the consumer, and it could be efficient. All right. So the fact that this is such a, this is what you want. It's not true. This is not what the world really wants. But I'm trying to explain what economists think and how they think a problem is solved. If they've got an efficient outcome, they say, "My God, that's it." They walk away. Okay. All right. So the second welfare theorem says that a price does exist under really minimal conditions, and here's the proof. It's a one-liner. What you do is you relax the constraint that supply equals demand. So the reason I wrote this like that, you've got a constraint. If you want to try to solve a problem like this, you relax the constraint. And so the Lagrange multiplier will be a function of time because we have a constraint for each time. And what you get is a beautiful Lagrangian decomposition because everything's separable, the way it's all additive. And so basically this turns into two maximizations. And that looks familiar, right? Because to solve this, I'm just maximizing this and maximizing this is exactly the setup of the definition of efficiency we started with. Okay. So it leads to this nice theorem. So if the social planner's problem has no duality gap, which will be true under some convexity conditions, so under very minimal conditions that's true, then we've solved the problem. There's a price, the nominal price we started with plus the Lagrange multiplier. That price will solve the social It will provide efficient equilibrium. And the price will be marginal value. That is true under reasonable conditions, but no way marginal cost. Absolutely not. It doesn't make sense. They've got these hard constraints and ramping constraints that just violates. You can't use the tricks economists use. The reason you can do this for value is because as a consumer, I don't have ramp constraints. I don't care about anything. I can move the power around because an optimal solution, I can do a perturbation. I can then end up proving this marginal value property. It takes a bit of work, but not much. All right. All right. And it is true, with a little work, you can show that the average price is the average marginal cost. You can show that. Actually, it turns out for certain initial conditions of the model, but that doesn't matter. This, makes economists scream with pleasure. It seems like, well, then it's all done. Everyone's happy. All right. All right, so that's So anyway, you can extend this in all sorts of directions. Of course, the transmission constraints, prices will be nodal. They could be negative. Anything you want. All right. So now that's a theory. This is what economists are so proud of, is this Lagrangian decomposition. And I've asked economists, some with Nobel Prizes, can you give me an example? Can you give me one example where a price is marginal, where this exists? I was told by Cho, the airline industry, which is just weird how regulated that is. It's nothing, there's no marginal anything there. And I was told by somebody else, well, forget it. I've never been given a straight answer on when this theory actually applies, and even gives insight. And I've asked this question for 15 years. I've only gotten anger. All right. So definitely price is not marginal cost. Because when you look at examples, I know these are the extreme examples, but you look at examples all over the place, prices are crazy. They go up and they go negative and they're all over the place. But where are the rational agents? How did we come up with this model and why? So let's look at the supplier. That's not bad. You have maybe some convex cost on generation, and definitely they want to make money. So I think from the supplier's point of view, this is a reasonable model. Now there are issues with it. For example, it's very costly to start up a generator. If you've been out for a day, it might take a week to get back online. There are dynamic constraints on long time scales, but in the context of one day, I think the model of a supplier is maybe perfect. What about this? There's a welfare for consumption for power. And that's a picture of me trying to look like an economist 15 years ago. And I said that I would talk about irrational agents. Well, there are two irrational agents, myself and Cho, because the value of power to consumers is not defined by anyone. There's no example where that makes any sense. And I've had a lot of reasons why I think this is a stupid model. I can give you other reasons, but this is the biggest one. And this didn't even occur to me until, I don't know, until recently, how ridiculous it is to think that there's utility function and power. And if you throw away that assumption, this all goes to shit. It's all over. None of this theory exists if you don't pretend that consumers have a utility function on power. None of you know what power looks like, or could care less. The power to this building could be going all over the place. Now those lights, yeah, they're examples. Those lights, you want a steady stream of power. There's examples, but that's about it. I mean, this baby, I want the power to this, but it's such a small percentage of the energy consumed where you're actually power sensitive. So it's just not the commodity of interest. Okay, so let me wrap up by explaining what the efficient outcome might look like. First, I'll make a little joke about what prices would actually do. And then I'll show what the actual efficient outcome would be, taking reality into account, and we could think about how to achieve that. Okay, so first of all, let's go back to this dream that economists have of price signals. So this is mandatory all over the world, is to have time of use prices. So basically, the goal of the generation company is to reduce demand for power over a few hours. This is what every US power economist would say we must do, is we must have prices go up during this period when you want power to go down. All right? So prices got to go up. Everyone says that. Everyone would agree. If I hadn't given you this big lead-in, I could have said to you all, well, if we need power to go down, obviously prices must go up during that period. You'd all go, yeah, of course. Well, you're wrong. It's absurd, and you'll see why. So here's an example. So we've got, basically this is California, where in the summer, where we've got 7 million air conditioners, 700,000 water heaters, same number of commercial water heaters, like big monsters. 17 million refrigerators in all the pools in California, which is a lot. There's a gigawatt of power maximum from all the power pools in California. And basically, there's an aggregator who has to represent those loads because an individual fridge can't respond. I mean, a fridge can only turn off at 30 minutes. This period here is an hour. It just doesn't make sense. You would need somebody to represent them. I mean, definitely, and anybody would agree with me. I mean, so every Wallach, Borenstein, all the economists I mentioned, they would agree with me. An aggregator has to be a middleman to make any of this work, or middle woman. And so the contract between the aggregator and the consumers would place some bound on quality of service. So forget the details here. The fridge has to remain within temperature within bounds. The pool has to be cleaned so many hours per day and per week. There's quality of service constraints in place. All right. So again, the utility company, because it was demanded by the economists in Sacramento and California, say you will have a price going up 10% over that period of time, and then the aggregator then will optimize subject to those constraints. Perfectly reasonable. All right. So this green area is the crisis period when the price went up 10%. Okay. So here's how the loads respond. It's not surprising. The air conditioners pre-cool because they know the price is going to go up. And this signal, you notice they only were able to turn off for about 30 minutes, and then they had to go back up again because of the quality of service constraints. The swimming pools are awesome because they're pretty oblivious. Their QoS constraints aren't very, very strict. So the pools, went up a little bit, shut down the entire period, and then there's a rebound, and so forth. The refrigerators were sort of nice in the beginning here, and this is the optimal outcome to that price hike. And the grid blows up. That's the end of California. There'd be a blackout. There'd be an absolute blackout because basically the overall power delivered went from 5 gigawatts to 15. That's like 8 nuclear power plants. I don't know. I mean, it's probably the power consumption of France. I don't know. I mean, it's definitely more than the power consumption of Paris. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's incredible, And then it shuts off. That would just completely blow up the grid. And then it remains off, the power comes off completely for about 40 minutes, and then it comes back almost to where it was, and there's a little spike at the end, and there's a recovery, And, the problem is that there was no promise of quality of service to the balancing authority. There's just a price signal sent out without any thought to what the grid operator wants. The grid operator doesn't want that. The consumers are happy. Doing this didn't affect them at all. Consumers didn't, and they saved a couple pennies on their bill. But it's ridiculous, completely ridiculous. And why did this happen? Again, there's a quiz here. It's that mismatch, right? Power is not something a consumer cares about. They care about the temperature of their hot water, the temperature of their fridge, the temperature of their house. They don't care about power. So they'll do all sorts of crazy things with power, And that mismatch is wonderful for control engineer, but it blows up the economic theory, you know. Now, yeah, okay. Okay, so we could design a price that would get the desired behavior. I'm sure if we sat down tonight, we could write down the Euler-Lagrange equations, find a price, but guess what? It would be non-causal, for sure. I mean, which is okay. But remember that I'm claiming each load has different specs. You know, the quality of service requirements for hot water heater are different than a fridge. So we need a different price for every load because the commodity of interest is different. It's a different product. You know, people say power is power. Well, that's not true. A fridge cares about power in a different way than a water heater. All right? So you'd have to set a different price to each load, and you have to put. Why would you do that? Why would you impose rationality of fridges to get a control solution when we can solve that control problem very easily? You know, it just doesn't make sense. So I hope I convinced you. Real-time prices are nuts. So here's what you would do if you actually were a control engineer and really cared about the problem. You would set up a contract with both sides, not just the consumers and the balancing authority. You'd promise QoS to all parties, the consumers and the balancing authority. And the aggregator's optimization problem would be what you call demand dispatch. You would automatically control these loads, making sure all parties are happy. And you know, you can formulate this as a quadratic program because you can put convexity assumptions and everything. It's not that strong an assumption. And here's an example, just numerical, of what you get. So this is what California looked like in March of this year. So they had a record record solar in March, and they had a ramp here going from 12 gigawatts to 26, so 14 gigawatts. This is real data from California from March. And you know, it's amazing that they didn't melt down. The grid did not melt down. Somehow the generators were able to respond. That's partly from the good forecast. So they had a lot of generators ready to go and all ramp up during that time and shut down. How you compensate for that, I don't know. If you do things right, you know, you'll get these kind of plots I showed you before, you know, where the pool's shut down, the ACs pre-cool, and then, well, actually, they're actually consuming less power here and more power here, you know. So they're pre-cooling a little bit here, and then they're letting themselves warm up so they can cool themselves like mad here. So they're actually the homes are getting warm. There's a temperature band. They're going to the warmest place so that they can be allowed to consume more power here, you know. And I don't know why the commercial hot water heaters were only helping for this period of time here. But the result is this blue curve where the generators would be much, much happier. And so this is with the same mix I showed you before. So this is with the loads currently in California. Now there's pressure in California to get rid of gas water heaters and make them all electric. If that happens, then we're going to get, oh, wait a second. Yeah. I'm sorry. Well, I said the generators will do the brown thing. So it's excuse me. So we've reduced the that ramp by 4 gigawatts, which is considerable, you know. After 10 years, when they get rid of the gas water heaters and make them electric, you know, the conjecture is we could flatten out much, much more, which is almost perfect. I mean, there's almost no problem, which means you can get a lot more renewable generation. And then once we put in all these electric vehicles and you do things right, everything's flat, you know. And so you've just got the traditional generation there, those are nuclear power plants just doing base load, and the rest of the world is just, you know, doing all the playing around. Okay. If you don't like nukes, you know, then natural gas or whatever, you know, just and it's really funny. In Colorado, I learned that cow cooling is a big load, which is very flexible. They spend a lot of electricity cooling the cows in the barns. And that's very flexible, apparently. Okay, in conclusion, this is actually adapted from a talk I gave in Bordeaux. That's why it says a rational agent in Bordeaux wants a shower. And when I gave this talk, it was so hot that everybody was sweating. So, but I hope you agree with me. This is idiotic. That modeling this, using this, is crazy. As if there's a utility function for g of t is just wacky. Please, if you disagree with me, tell me. It doesn't make any sense. The utility function would be on theta, hot water. But there's a dynamical system between generation and hot water. And that really makes things hard. So markets, I love markets. So I'm always told I'm a communist or a Stalinist. I've been called that so many times. I think innovation from markets is beautiful. I can give so many examples. And I love control. What I really think is that this high-frequency trading is completely, whatever that means, completely irrational. and that's the thing. So how to resolve this? Oh, yeah. This is me last year after the hurricanes in Florida. And there's lots of references here. How to resolve this? I think it's not that hard. We just have to get in the game. Right now, policymakers won't listen to engineers. They only listen to economists. At least that's true in the US. And I know that's happened in Europe as well. The European Union is pushing for real-time prices. It's happening here as well. And you need scientists to fight back. And it seems so simple that this is not the right way to proceed. The way to do it is some sort of incentives. Or mandates. If nobody notices, if nobody even knows that you're moving around their spike trains, why do you need an incentive? Is anybody paying you for TCP/IP on your laptop? There's congestion control in communications. Are you getting paid bits per back off? When your bandwidth goes down, do you get pennies thrown at you? There's congestion control on the internet. Why can't there be congestion control in the power grid? It's a no-brainer to me. But anyway, let's have a debate. Thank you. Yes.
I have a question. A clarification on the setup of the real-time prices that you have in your results.
Yeah.
So actually, in the plots with the red card, I don't know.
Oh, this one here.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
So I don't understand how this can be possible, because if the power rises so much, the prices should rise as well. So all the users should adapt to this, right?
Oh no, the prices doesn't matter. No, if the price, I see. Okay, you're right. I need more time on this. So, all right. So there's two kinds of real-time prices. One is that there's a feedback loop. So the price changes every microsecond, and there's no way anybody, even Frank Wallach, would not promote that, because you withhold the information from the consumer. So I, as a balancing authority, I've got supercomputers doing forecasts for the next day. Why wouldn't I tell the consumers my information? I can't withhold that information. So this is just showing time of use pricing. So this is what's being promoted today in all over the world, here in Europe as well as California, is to have prices go up at forecast peak periods. Right? So if you try to close the loop, good luck. Try to solve that dynamical systems problem, and try to make, because this mismatch between power and, between power and quality of service. Every single load would have different dynamical properties, and so if you try to have prices that really change every microsecond, it was a feedback loop. Good luck. I don't think anyone promotes that anymore. They used to. But I think that's been discarded now. Yeah. And And God, can you imagine trying to simulate that? It'd be fun to try. I'd love. But it's beyond me. Yeah. Yes.
I have a question to understand how it works in reality. I think it is something that happens in the US. you may have changed for everybody of 10% announced in advance.
Yes.
For everybody.
Yes. Yeah.
Because in France,
yeah.
In knowledge, it's not the case. So.
Okay. Yeah. No, they have. They have these peak. I mean, there's different. They have they're experimenting right now. There's different. There are different programs for different types of customers. But one of the biggest things you hear about is time of use pricing. Yeah. And it's just and it's never been that great. I mean, it's helped. France has been one of the better places. I mean, in England, nobody even cares. They have time of use pricing, very little response. In France, I've heard more people respond, and it has helped to dampen prices. But the thing is, it's been such a. I mean, given the value of demand, depressing prices by 1% is such a, small goal. I mean, this would only happen if people really got serious about putting consumers in the loop. That's my point, and it would be destructive. And right. So you don't see this disaster in real life because people don't have an aggregator helping them, and so you just have a small percentage of consumers who say, "Okay, I'll do my hot water, my washing later," But it works because it's not being used. It's yes.
I have a stupid question.
That's supposed to be a stupid talk, so that's great.
I guess across the type of usage, the price remains the same. Power is, whatever you do with it, it is the unit cost you pay for kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
So the simplistic question I have is, what if we were doing a flat rate, even over time?
Oh, but it is usually. I mean, so this is what's being promoted so much. So basically, people like, most power economists say to solve the problem of peaks in power, you just need to make the price go up in that period. And I'm saying my argument is that's stupid. They haven't thought about the problem. And they're not stupid, but that statement is stupid. Because having the price go up during this period doesn't solve anything. Yeah. But making flat prices, but I agree with you, having prices go up and down doesn't solve anything.
Yeah.
We could do everything with automatic control very nicely. Yeah, that's my point.
We can take the pricing model for underground transport in London and metro in Paris.
Uh-huh.
In London, it depends on the time of the day, and it depends on the distance you go.
Yeah.
In Paris, everything is flat.
Yeah.
This is a pricing model, and I don't know if London metro underground is more profitable than Paris underground.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting because it is similar. So transportation is another deferrable service, and if you don't design those prices right, you could create a big peak. So if you made a huge prices, it's one part of the day, you cause a big peak later. And so they carefully tune these prices, I guess, to try to flatten things out, I suppose. But here, I mean, power it's so different. Power, we're talking about every second. This is like high frequency trading in the worst sense. What you're talking about, there's only 5 options, And so you have 5 prices, and with a lot of combinatorics, maybe you can design those prices to sort of level things out and shift around demand. I can see that. But here we're talking about every second or every minute, and it's a dynamical system. And again, every class of load has different dynamics. And so I don't see how you could do it without a different price signal to each load. And I don't see why you would do it that way, because it's such an easy control problem. That's the thing, is that they're trying to solve a control problem with real-time prices. And they're making the problem so much harder by doing that. That's my argument. So, yeah.
I think also, I agree with you, but I mean, it's a bit unfair to give this example like this, because you should consider also a learning effect. I mean, if you learn that this is bad, you adjust the prices accordingly.
Well, yeah.
Until you find a good pricing
Yeah.
avoids this.
Well, that's why I put that conjecture at the end. So you could design a price signal that would work, but it would be, again, it would be different for every load, you know? Yeah. I mean, I'm sure of that because there are different commodities for each load. And again, it goes to the question, why? What's the motivation? It's only because of some fantasy from economists from the 70s. You know, there's some dream that, you know, economists had during the late 70s. That's really what's happened. It's a cultural thing, you know. It really is. It's a cultural thing. There's no economic rationale for doing it this way. So an economist who wasn't sort of steeped in this real-time prices culture would say it's contracts. You know, you've got uncertainty, you've got risk, you've got this very complex products on both sides. You set up contracts between suppliers and consumers. You know, that's what. But those economists don't go into power. They don't. You know, I don't know, for some reason. I don't know one. I don't know a single one. In the U.S. In France, I'm sure there are exceptions. You know. Cool. I guess meeting adjourned. Thank you.